Okay, so today we're going to start on something a little bit different. We've been going through the Adobe suite thus far: Photoshop, InDesign, then Illustrator, and everything seems very the same. It's all by Adobe, and we kind of go through it. As part of this class, you know, it's an overview of a bunch of different stuff, and we've spent a lot of time debating what belongs in the class and what doesn't belong in the class. And for a long time, I taught Vectorworks as part of it because Daniel was kind of pushing the Vectorworks angle. And about 3 years ago or so, I finally convinced him that really AutoCAD was more appropriate. If you look in the world of architecture, I'd say it's changing a little bit with Revit, but I'd say maybe 75% or more of architecture is done in AutoCAD. It's just kind of the bread and butter of the industry. AutoCAD's been around forever. I learned AutoCAD when it was on release 12, which was before there was even like a graphic interface. It was all command line. So it's definitely been around forever. It has evolved a fair amount. It can do a lot more than it used to do. I also am not under some illusion that somehow I can teach you AutoCAD in a couple weeks. AutoCAD is a very complicated program. It takes time to learn it. It takes a lot of practice. My hope is that a large number of you already have some AutoCAD experience. Who's worked in AutoCAD before? This is generally the case. There's always a few of you that raise your hand. You guys are more than half of who's here, so that's a good sign. If you've worked in AutoCAD before, this shouldn't be too hard. We have to get through the basics so that people feel comfortable in it. My goal, though, in this section of AutoCAD is to actually try to teach you some things that you don't probably know or haven't experienced before that I think will help you out a lot. We'll talk about how do you get good quality output from AutoCAD. So you've spent all this time doing a drawing. How do you get good line weights? How do you get it to actually print correctly? Those kinds of things. We will also not forget the things that we learned in Illustrator, and we'll take our AutoCAD file back into Illustrator to do some more work on it. So these really do work as a cycle, so don't forget all the Adobe stuff that we talked about beforehand just because we're going into the world of AutoCAD. Generally speaking, for this AutoCAD section, I'm not going to have the big formal lectures ahead of the demo period. We're going to do a lot of time just in the demo period, just talking about the software. There's a lot to kind of take in and to understand as AutoCAD because it's different than anything you've worked in before. But like I said, I think it's really important for the industry for you guys to have some familiarity or a lot of familiarity with AutoCAD. The other contender out there is also made by Autodesk. It's called Revit. Some of you have taken the Revit class. If you haven't taken the Revit class and you intend to follow through and end up practicing architecture someday, taking Revit is not a bad idea. I will admit that I don't know Revit. It came out after I was in grad school, so I never had the opportunity to learn it, and none of the people that I work with currently use it, so there's no reason for me to learn it at this point. So I'm not a huge resource for you in that. If, however, you feel like you do want to learn Revit, there is a Saturday class that's offered next semester. You come in just on Saturday. I think it's a 4-hour class on Saturdays. It's only Saturdays. It's taught by Matthew Mead, who's the other person who teaches this class in the evenings. He comes in and teaches that Revit class. From what I understand, he's very good at it. So if that's something you want to learn, that's a good place to go about learning it. So I also promised him that I would announce that so that you guys were aware of that. So I'm doing my due diligence here. So today we're going to work in AutoCAD. The computers here at school have 2 versions of AutoCAD on them. They have 2016 and 2017. AutoCAD really likes to release a new version every year. It's just kind of the way AutoCAD works. The changes between them are non-existent for the most part. There's nothing that you guys need to do that wouldn't be in AutoCAD 2004. So it really doesn't matter the changes that they're making, which version you choose to use. I'm going to go ahead and use the AutoCAD 2017 here. I have a variety of versions also installed. See, one of the things, sorry, this is probably too much background information. We get a license from Autodesk to run all of their software. So there's a lot of times multiple versions of AutoCAD on the computer. There's Revit on the computer. It's the same. It's kind of like the Adobe products where you have all Photoshop, InDesign, Illustrator. Same kind of thing here. So anyway, I'm going to use the plain AutoCAD 2017 English. If you're not seeing it on your desktop, you can go in and go to All Apps. You can look for AutoCAD 2017 English. We're going to stay away from the AutoCAD architecture. You don't need the features that are in that just yet, so just go with the plain AutoCAD, and we'll go ahead and open that up. And you got to love it that it wants a license. Classic, right? Yeah, as if it'll let me even cancel, right? Sometimes you got to laugh at this stuff. I'm going to try to open up AutoCAD 2016 and see if that one works for me. Like I said, there's virtually no difference between them, so it's not the end of the world. I'm going to try opening them again, because they clearly don't like me. Anybody else having this trouble right now? Or it's just me? I just tried that.
You want to open 2016,
It doesn't matter. It doesn't make any difference. I just want something to open for me.
yes.
Can't win.
No, it seems to be open.
Well, I'm glad all of yours open. It's convenient for you. Okay, so I finally got 2016 open, so that'll work for me. To get started here, I'm going to go ahead and create a brand new drawing. In the upper left corner, there's a little new file. Some of you, looks like, have already started working, which is great. When we get to the templates here, the default is just fine. And we'll go ahead and open it. And that then opens up AutoCAD. AutoCAD, in the world of AutoCAD, we draw with white lines on a black background for the most part. The theory being, and this has been the case forever in AutoCAD, the theory being that people that work in AutoCAD stare at the computer for really long periods of time, and having a black background with white lines makes it much easier to see what you're doing, and therefore it's not as straining on your eyes. So that's why we have a black background. As I kind of walk through, I like to walk through the software just like I do with the Adobe products to get you guys familiar with what's going on here. Across the top, way up by the little AutoCAD logo, there's New, and then there's Save Your Files and Plot Your Files. In AutoCAD, printing is called plotting. It doesn't really matter whether you refer to it as printing or plotting. It's just that's how they refer to it. Has to do with the idea that you're plotting to an oversized printer for the most part. Below that, we have a series of ribbons here. The first one is the Home ribbon. It has the most often used tools as we go across. Chances are you won't need to move too much out of that ribbon as we do our things. Right here we've got our basic line tool. You notice that the big, most common tools are the big buttons. Then we get into the smaller buttons. If something isn't listed here, you can pull the little drop-down menu and you get some of the less common used tools that are there as well. We move over to modify. These are things like move, trim, etc. Those are all available to you right there. We move over to annotation, which are dimensions. We will not cover doing dimensioning in this class because there's not enough time to do it. So if it's something you really want more familiarity with, you should take the AutoCAD class. Actually, you should probably take the AutoCAD class anyway, just to be prepared. But at least this will give you enough of a jump start so that you can do some laser cutting and some of the basics, which is really the goal here. As we move over, we have a layers section. We will work extensively with layers as we go forward. Today, we're just going to work on layer 0, so there's nothing you need to do to change that. Blocks are referenced files. We have a file that we've saved of a bed or a couch, and we can bring that file in as a reference. We'll walk through how to do that. Next here, we have properties. These are the properties of a given line. So we could say make a line thicker or thinner, make it dashed or not dashed, etc. We could change the color of the line, that kind of thing. Again, not something we're dealing with today. And then we have a few other commands, including measure if you want to know how long a particular line is. The big black space here is what we're drawing in. We're drawing in a top view in AutoCAD. We will only work in 2 dimensions, so we'll work just flat looking down. Even though we'll draw elevations, they'll still be flat. They're not in 3 dimensions. The truth is, I don't think AutoCAD is particularly good at 3D. I don't think it ever has been. If I were going to do 3D, I'd flip over into Rhino and do the 3D there, which is really what AutoCAD should be in 3 dimensions. As we come down here, there's a few tabs. One says model. That's what we should be in. We'll talk about what these layout tabs are a little bit later on in the class. They're called paper space, and we'll get into what those mean. Right here, kind of floating along the bottom here, is something called a command line. And in AutoCAD and other similar drawing applications, a command line is really the powerhouse of what you're doing. If you're fast at working in these programs, you use the command line a lot. You end up typing a lot of commands. I will alternate, type some commands. I'll show you where the menu structure is, where the buttons are for a given thing. But you'll notice on the handouts that sometimes there's like a typewriter font. If you see the typewriter font, it means I'm telling you to type it in. Okay, so I try to do that as consistently as possible. It's also on the course website here. If we were to go to today's exercise, for example. Oops. No, there we go. You can see that the little typewriter font shows up whenever I'm referencing something that you can type into the command line. So I just want you to be aware that that's what I'm saying when I say to type in something. Okay, it's down here like that. Over here on the right side, we have a variety of tools that are available to us. One here being the grid. Should we have grid on, grid off? We have something called Object Snap, which is a blue square with a little dot in the corner. We will use that a lot today. I do need you to turn off, as we get started, something called Dynamic Input. And it's not shown by default in your AutoCAD. So I want you to go to the 3 little lines in the far right corner. And I want you to check the box for Dynamic Input. Okay, so that dynamic input should be checked. And once you've checked that, dynamic input should look like a little plus with a box below it. So I'll draw that here. I know these are at the bottom of the projector. Should look like a plus with a little filled in box below it. I want you to make sure that that is turned to white, because I want it to be off. And the reason that I'm turning it off is just so that I can explain the coordinate systems a little bit better in the beginning. We will ultimately turn it back on, but this will help you a lot in kind of understanding how AutoCAD works. So make sure that that is in fact turned off. It should be white, and then we can continue with what we're doing today. So AutoCAD is built around a couple things that are kind of critical, that are different than any of the programs we've worked with so far. Number one, it is mathematically driven completely, so it actually has a coordinate system. If you remember back to like math class in geometry or algebra or whatever, where you had coordinates and you had to draw a line between 2 points and that sort of thing, same thing works here. We actually have an x and a y axis. The x-axis down here at the bottom is red. I know it's probably hard to see on the screen. The y-axis right here is green. That's going up vertical. There is a point at 0, 0 at the very origin, which is right there where the two places intersect. The other thing about AutoCAD is when we draw everything full scale. So we're not ever doing any conversions. We just draw it as if it's full size, life size. So we have a room and it's 20 feet long. We draw that 20 feet. We'll deal with scaling when we get further along. And how do you do scales? The advantage here is that you can always change scales. So you draw it full size and then you can get any scale out of it that you want, which is really useful as we start to do our modeling. So what I want you to do is I want you to start with the line tool here. Or actually, let's start with the Polyline tool. Then it'll be continuous. I'll click on Polyline. Oh, actually, you know what? Before I need to do that, I should follow my own handout. That would be good, right? Before we do that, type units and hit enter. And that will bring up our drawing units. By default, it's probably in decimals. We want to change that to be in architectural. And the rest of these options are all fine. So the length should be in architectural, and we'll go ahead and say OK. That's then converted our units so that we can use feet and inches as we start to draw. I'm going to go ahead and click on the Polyline tool. And as I work in AutoCAD, we know that I want to start at point 0, 0, which is right here. And for illustration purposes, I'm going to do it over here for just a second. Now, let's say that I wanted to put my cursor right where those two cross. If I were to click and say, yeah, that's right on where those two grid lines cross, and oh yeah, that looks pretty good. If I zoom in, you see that suddenly it's not on that cross anymore. That's a problem. So I've zoomed in. Let me try that one more time. I'll get right on top of it. OK, I got it this time, right? Then you zoom in and you're like, well, no, I don't have it. So the thing about AutoCAD is it's very, very accurate. And so if you just try to click on something like this, you're not going to get the actual point that you want. It's going to be close to it. So instead, we're going to type in where we want to start. So I'm going to click on the Polyline tool, and I'm going to type in 0, 0 into the command line. So here's that command line down here at the bottom. I type 0, 0, and I'll go ahead and press enter. There we go. And now, no matter how far I zoom in, that point is always right where those two cross, because it's specifically that mathematical point. So let me zoom out a little bit here. And I want to draw my next line 0, 24 feet. And so what I want is essentially a line that's 24 feet long in this direction, but it doesn't go anything in the x direction. So if you remember back to coordinates, the x coordinate always comes first, followed by the y coordinate. So if my point, I want it to be 24 feet up here, my coordinate would be 0, 24, and then a little apostrophe represents feet. So I'll put that little apostrophe in, and I'll hit enter, and that creates a line that's 24 feet long. Now, unfortunately, my window is outside of where my line is, so I'm going to hit enter one more time. And then I'll type Z for zoom, followed by E for extents, and then enter. It just zooms me out a little bit so I can see my whole line. You can also use some of the zoom tools that are over here. Zoom extents is a little button that should be available right there. That should zoom all of your drawings. OK, so let me come back to the Polyline tool, and I'm going to continue on here. Now, I want my line to start right where this other line ends. And so this is where something called object snap comes into play. My object snap happens to already be on. Yours may or may not be. So I want to talk you through this. If you move your mouse over the end of that line and you get a little green square, that means your snap is on. If you don't get that little green square, it means you need to turn it on. The object snap is available down here at the bottom in this little tray. It's the blue square with the green corner highlighted on it. If you click the arrow next to it, you get all of the object snaps that are available. I would suggest turning endpoint on, suggest turning midpoint on, and personally, I always run perpendicular on as well. I think that's a very useful one. Stay away from nearest. That one will get you into trouble. Sometimes people like nearest, and it's useful occasionally, but for the most part, it'll get you into trouble. So keep that one off. The rest of these, intersection is fine, center is fine. For me, endpoint, midpoint, and perpendicular are probably the most critical to have on. Okay, so we make sure that it is highlighted in blue down here with the little green dot on it. And when I hover over my mouse, or over the end of my line, I get that green square. If I click, my line will start exactly at that particular point. So now, as I continue along here, I want a line that is 12 feet long going over in this direction. So if I think about my coordinates, it would be 12 feet, comma, 24 feet. And recognize this is all referencing where 0 is. So this would be 12 feet, comma, 24 feet, and I'll hit enter. That gives me a line that's 12 feet long in that direction. So those are both called absolute coordinates. So if I wanted to continue on with absolute coordinates, I could do another one. If I wanted it to be down 6, I'd have to know that it would be up 18, so it would be 12, comma, 18 feet. 12, can't type, feet, comma, 18 feet for that line. To me, that's a lot of math, though, to try to keep track of. Like, where is it in the coordinate system? So AutoCAD introduced something called relative coordinates. So instead of referencing point 0, 0, it will reference the last point that you clicked. So relative to this point that I just clicked, I want to go at 0, because I don't want to go anything in the x direction, comma, negative 6 feet, because I want to go down. So it's y would be negative going down, negative 6 feet, enter, and that then creates this line. So it's the same thing, but it's relative to the last point you clicked. So relative to this point, I want to go over 12. So this would be at 12 feet, comma, 0, because it's nothing in the y. And then I'll hit enter. I can continue on here. I want to go down. This would be at 0, comma, negative 12 feet. Enter. You get the difference. The at sign is that relative. I could flip back for illustration purposes. This one would be at 12, comma, 6, oh, 12, sorry, I need the feet, comma, 6 feet. Oops. I shouldn't have put the at sign in. This is just 12 feet, comma, 6 feet. There we go. Or I could say at 0, comma, negative 6 feet. So you can flip back and forth between the two. It's just whether you put the at sign in or not. When I'm done, I can snap back to where I started. If you have a continuous polyline, you can also press C for close, followed by enter. I'm going to click there to finish. So now I've created this shape right here. This shape also worked with absolute coordinates because I started at point 0, 0. It's significantly harder if I start at some arbitrary point out in space here and try to draw this, because I don't know where that point is. So I would have to use relative coordinates in this case. So at 0, comma, 24 feet, at 12 feet, comma, 0, etc. Okay? So we've used these coordinates, which is something that I want you to be aware of, because there are times where the coordinates are really, really useful when you're drawing. And you'll see those when they come up. But also, there's another way of working it. And you guys, I made you all turn off dynamic input when we first started. I'm going to go ahead and let you turn that back on now. And with dynamic input turned on, you can see that it gives me a little floater menu next to my cursor. And it says specify next point or, and then it has a distance length to it. So I could actually type in a distance here. So 6 feet, for example. And you see that it gives me a line that's 6 feet starting at the point that I had. Now I want it to go straight down, so I'll make sure that it snaps down. But it also might be useful to turn on something called Ortho. So Ortho mode is the little right angle symbol here, which will force it to go at 90 degrees. So I can go ahead and type 6 feet. Sorry, 6 feet. There it is. Now I could just type 12 feet, 12 feet. So all I need is the distance, essentially, and the direction. 12 feet, 6 feet, and I can come back to where I started. So that really improves the speed with which you're doing things. So once again, 24 feet, 12 feet, 6 feet, 12 feet, 12 feet, 12 feet, 6 feet. And this time I'll press C to close, and it'll finish and close the shape. So doing this a few times for practice isn't necessarily a bad thing. It gets you familiar with what's going on with your shapes here. I'm going to go ahead and delete those two shapes. And I'm going to work with my original shape here as we continue on. So the next thing that I want to walk through is something called the offset command. And what the offset command does is it takes a set of lines and it makes a duplicate set to one side or the other that's a given distance from the first set. So offset is available under the home menu here. It's right there. It looks like a kind of a white line surrounded by a blue line. The alternative would be to type offset. So I'll click on that offset. I want to look down here at the command line. And as I read the command line, it says offset. Specify offset distance, or gives me a few options. My offset distance needs to be 6 inches. So I'll actually type 6 followed by a quotation mark. And I'll hit enter. That gives me the offset distance of 6 inches. Now I need to click the line that I want to offset. So I'll click this line here. And then I need to click on the side that I want to offset to. So I want to go offset to the inside here. There it is. I want to offset this object to the inside. Now, depending on how you drew your original curve, you may get just one line that goes all the way around. I drew this first one separately from the rest of them, which is why the corners overlap. We'll have to fix that in a little bit. So there I have the offset. I'll hit enter to finish. The other thing that you can do if you're ever stuck and something's not working, hit escape a few times. It'll get you out of whatever command you're in, and you can kind of restart from there. So as I start to work with this, I've now created the duplicate line. We're going to add some doors and some windows, and I'll explore a few other commands. For the purposes of today, there is a little drawing on the back, a floor plan on the back of your sheet. This is essentially what we're trying to create. If you feel really comfortable in AutoCAD, by all means, just go for it, make it your own, adapt it, etc. But this is just a place to start. It gives you something to work with a little bit. So I want, first off, to make those corners not overlap anymore. I'm going to use a command called trim to do that. It's right listed up here under trim. If I click on the button for trim, or if I type trim, it's going to say select objects or select all. So I want to select these two objects. Now I have two different ways of selecting when I select objects. If I select from the right side, whether it's from the top or from the bottom, notice that the selection turns green, and anything that I touch will be selected. So in this case, those two lines are selected. Alternatively, if I start from the left and go toward the right, I get a blue square. And notice that nothing is selected in this case because it has to be completely contained within the object. So in order to select those same two lines, I'd have to select the whole shape because it has to be completely contained within the boundary box. And this is very useful as we go forward in terms of, and I'll show you this again as we go forward. So I'm going to go back to trim. I'm going to go from right to left to select those two objects. I'll hit enter. And then you'll see that when I mouse over the ends of these objects, I get a little X, and it kind of grays out the object. That allows me to click on those pieces and make them go away. If I come down to the bottom here, I have the same selection group, so I can click there, and those two pieces go away. Now, if yours was a continuous shape when you did the offset, you don't have to worry about it because it already did it for you. I'll hit Enter to finish the trim command. And now I need to start drawing in where that door goes here. So I'll use a regular line, and I want to draw a line exactly in the middle of this wall. I asked you earlier to turn on midpoint snap. If it's not on, this won't happen, but I'm assuming that it is on at this point. And when I move to the middle, you'll see that instead of getting a square, I get a little triangle. The triangle represents the midpoint, so I can snap from the midpoint of one line to the midpoint of the other line, and I get the very center of this wall. There's my very center. I can now offset this line by half the distance. So the door is 3 feet, so half of 3 feet would be 18 inches. So I'll do an offset. Remember, I could click the offset button, or I could type offset, which I did. My distance is going to be 18 inches. And I'll offset this that direction. Now, notice that when I typed in offset, and it said specify offset distance, I typed in 18 inches. I could also type in 1 apostrophe for feet, 6 inches, and it would do the same thing. So it reads feet in inches, or all feet. So you don't have to worry about that conversion. So we're going to go off in that direction at 1 foot 6 inches as well. So now that I have those two lines offset, I need to get rid of the lines that intersect, because this is a door. It's going to be shown as open. But I also need to get rid of this line that's in the very center. So this is an example here where if I were to select from right to left, I would get the bottom and top and the line that's in between them. If I select from left to right in the blue, see, just that one piece that's completely contained gets selected. So learning which way to select is an important skill in AutoCAD. I'll go ahead and press the delete key here. And then I'm going to continue by using the trim command. So I'll come up here to trim, or I'll type trim. It says select objects. I'll go from right to left to select all of those objects. I'll hit enter. Then I need to mouse over, and I'll click on that piece, and I'll click on that piece. When I'm done, I'll go ahead and press enter again. And now I've cut a little hole that's in the center of this wall, between the wall. OK, so now that that's done, I can draw in the actual door. I could do that using a rectangle. So it's up here. There's a rectangle. I'll click on this point. Now this door has a thickness to it. Since it's an exterior door, it would be 1 3/4 inches. If you don't know the thickness, it doesn't matter. This is not a technical class. You'll get to technical classes where you'll talk about this kind of stuff. Some reasonable sized door is fine with me. It happens to be 1 3/4 inches. So here's an opportunity to use those relative coordinates. So I'll type the @ sign. And this time, with the @ sign in place, I'm going to say 1.75 inches, comma. Oops, sorry. -3 feet, enter. There we go. So I was able to create that using those relative coordinates. So there's a perfect example of where using a relative coordinate is an easy solution to draw this. Could I have instead used a polyline, started here and said 3 feet, 1.75 feet, oops, 1.75 inches, sorry, 3 feet, C for close, sure. Just a different way of drawing it. So there's always multiple ways of drawing this. Whether I use the rectangle or whether I use the polyline makes no difference long term. Next thing I need to do is do that little door swing, the arc of the door. The first arc here is not the easiest one to use in this circumstance. So click the little triangle below, and you'll see that there's a bunch of other ways of creating arcs. I'm going to use the start, end, and direction arc. And for this, I just need to specify the start of the arc, the end of the arc, and whether it swings out or in. It's a much easier way of doing the door swing. So there's a door. Now I need to go ahead and create the window that goes through this. All right. So what I need is I need to go ahead and create a window, and I have some dimensions relative to where the door is. So I have a foot that's over here, and then I have 2 feet for the window. So why don't I take this line, and I'll use the offset command again. My distance this time is only 1 foot, so I'll type in 1 foot followed by enter, and I'll offset that first window. Then I'll repeat the offset command. Oops. Offset. This time it's 2 feet because that's the width of my window. So I'll do 2 feet, and there it is. I'll hit enter to finish. Windows usually have a little bit, and it doesn't show on the plans. They usually have a piece of glass showing. You could get a little fancy and you could offset that piece of glass so that there's actually 2 panes of glass, and delete the one in the middle. It's up to you. If you feel comfortable doing something like that, is not a bad thing. So I have that window there. I want the same window on the other side over here. So if I want that same window on the other side, if I were to select the window, and notice that I'm selecting from left to right to select just the window. If I did from right to left, I'd get the window and the wall. I don't want that. So left to right, I get just the window. Now I'm going to use the mirror command. It's available right here under mirror, or I could type mirror. And I need to mirror this so that it ends up over here. Now it would be really convenient if I still had that midpoint snap, but I don't have it anymore. So instead I'll come down to the bottom, which is the same width, so the same midpoint would still apply. And I'll draw a mirror line going right through the center here. So second click. Do I want to erase the original objects? Yes or no? No, I do not. And that gives me this line and this line. If I want this window to get copied down below over to here, I can use the same mirror command. So let me select it. I'll go back to mirror. This time I'll pick the center here, or the midpoint there. And that gives me, do I want to erase? No. That gives me this window. I want a second copy of that window that's 6 inches away from the first. I'll select this. I'll use the copy command right here. And the copy command says specify base point. It would be convenient if I click on this point here and I move it over. I don't know how far that is, so I have to do some math. It's a 2-foot window plus 6 inches. It would be 2 feet 6 inches. Like that. Now if I want the window that's on the vertical wall right here, I could still use mirror, but I'm going to use it in a different way. So instead of using mirror horizontally or vertically, I'm going to use mirror on a 45-degree line. So I'll take this object and I'll go to mirror, and I'll pick this corner followed by that corner, and I will have mirrored across a diagonal line. So it saves me from drawing it. Could I draw it? Sure. It's just a way of saving me some steps. So I'm mirroring across that 45-degree line. You can see a lot of the dimensions. There's a few other dimensions that aren't there, like this door here. I don't know exactly where that door is. I could say it's maybe 4 inches away from the wall. Now, let's say that I want to draw this line at 4 inches from the wall. I could use the same commands we've been doing. I could draw a line there. I could do offset 4 inches, and then offset 3 feet there, for example. Or I could go to my line tool and I could hover. I'm not clicking. I could hover over that point and then move my mouse down. And see how I leave that little green plus and then I get a dotted line? I could specify a distance here. So I could say 4 inches. And that then starts a line that's 4 inches from where I referenced the point. And I could draw a perpendicular line there. I'll repeat the line command. Right-clicking will give you that context menu. so I could repeat the line. I'll hover over that object, I'll go into that dotted line, and I'll type 3 feet. That creates the second line, like that. Now I need to do the trim command, so I'll go back to the trim command. From right to left to select all the objects, enter. We'll get rid of that piece and that piece. Now I need to actually draw the door, so I'll go back to the rectangle command. You can see how this becomes repetitive, right? Rectangle command right on that corner. This time it's going to be at 3 feet, comma, negative 1.75 inches. Oops. Negative 1.75 inches. There we go. And there's the little door. I'm going to go back to my arc. Remember, I want the start, end, and direction. Start, end, and direction. And there I have that door swing. If I were adding in a line in the middle here, I can go from there to there. I could go from here to there. I need to do some trimming, so trim, or I could select the trim button. Select all of that, enter. We'll get rid of that and that. We'll get rid of that. I have the same door here, so let me take this door. Again, I'm selecting from left to right on this one. I'm going to copy it. It's going to ask me the point to copy from, or the base point. It's right there. I'll move it up to right there. And now I have the second copy of that door. And I want to trim those two pieces. So I'll type trim, or select the trim command. Perfect. I'll hit enter. We want that piece to go away and that piece to go away. Okay, so let me just see if there's anything else I want to introduce to you. A couple other things that can be useful to you. If you want to, let's say we have two lines here, and I want them to meet at a rounded corner, I can use something called a fillet. It's F-I-L-L-E-T. It's also available right there under fillet. I'll hit enter. It's going to ask me for the radius. So I'm going to click on radius here and type in what I want it to be. I'll type in 1 foot just for illustration purposes. And I can then take this line and connect them in an arc, which may or may not be useful for you. This is actually a great trick, though. If I have two lines in space and I want them to come together at a sharp point, I can use that fillet command. And instead of typing a radius of 1 foot, I'll type a radius of 0. And these two lines will come together at a sharp corner in space. It's a really good trick to be able to work with it. There was a couple times where I was drawing over here that I wanted to use that, because that's what I tend to do. Even if you had two lines that were crossed, maybe like that, and you wanted those two lines to come together at a corner, fillet, radius should be 0. Notice it does save whatever the last setting was, so I didn't actually have to specify a radius of 0 anymore. And I can make those two come together without trimming. So it's just another way of going about doing it. Chamfer is similar to a fillet. It's just a straight line instead of an arc. So a chamfer is going to specify distance. If I did 1 foot by 1 foot, we would get these two lines connecting in an angle. It's there if you want it, or if you find it interesting. We did mirror, we did chamfer, we did... the last thing would be rotate. If you want to rotate an object, if we select the object here and we go to rotate, it's going to say specify a base point. So this is the point around which we want to rotate. So maybe it's that point. Next thing it will start rotating. And it's jumping in 90-degree jumps because I have my ortho mode on. If I turned it off, you can see it not. It's much more flexible here. I can also choose to reference. So I could say this line is the one that I want to rotate around as opposed to just an arbitrary line. And then once I've figured out where I want it to go, it's just a matter of finishing the rotation. So my goal for you guys today is to get this floor plan figured out and done. Add windows. If you feel really comfortable in AutoCAD, go ahead and add other stuff in. There's no harm in practicing. If you get done, we're going to create a JPEG of this particular drawing. And to do that, we're going to go to the plot menu, which is right here. It's the little printer. And here under the plotter, we're going to choose at the very bottom, there's DWG, or excuse me, publish to web JPEG. That's what we want. You can use the default paper size, that's fine. And I would suggest plotting a window. So under plot area, what to plot is a window. If you guys get a little lost, I'll come around and I'll help you. I know this is at the end of what you do today. You'll be doing it. Plotting to window just allows us to specify that there's a window. If you want to preview it, you can click on preview and you can see, oh, yep, there's my drawing. We're not worried about scale today. It doesn't need to be specific size. We're not getting into paper space today. We will get into paper space a little bit later on. I just need a JPEG image for you guys to post as part of today. When you go ahead and say OK, it will then pop up and ask you where to save your file. So this would need to go into your flash drive or your OneDrive. And let me get in here to live demonstrations. And this is 18. There we go. And I'll just save it as that for right now. And I'll click Save, etc. OK? So that's it for today. If you finish early, start working on anything else that you have going on. I know it's midterm season, so you all have plenty to be working on if you finish. Are there any questions? No.